Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to this event and taking time out of your busy day to listen to my what I would like to share with you today. So, I loved Anand's presentation. I thought it was dead on, and everything he said was fantastic. And I'm also excited about AI. I've been following AI for almost 40 years now, and this is one of the few times, like this is basically the first time where I'm getting a sense for the AI community. It actually is going to get something done this time, and it has some real value to add. And because back in the past, it was wishful thinking that never really went anywhere. All interesting research stuff, of course, but not practical for the most part. So anyway, but we'll have to see. Who knows, right? But I highly suspect AI is definitely in our future. Well, it's actually right now in our present as well, but certainly in our future. So, but anyways, back on track here. So what I would like to talk about is choosing your wow, choosing your own way of working, and actually getting back to one of the original ideas that came out of the Agile community, and particularly the extreme programmers, that you should own your own process. You should choose your own way of working. And the question is how do you do that? And why would you want to do that? So as you heard, I'm the co-creator of the Discipline Agile Toolkit along with Mark Lyons. I'm the Vice President and Chief Scientist for Discipline Agile at Project Management Institute. And we are moving forward with bringing DA out to the world, and some great ideas. So I'm going to do a very brief overview of a very big topic in 20 minutes. So anyways, there's a few issues I'd like to work through, but the first question is, and the survey we heard, the survey results we heard earlier are very similar to this. Are we there yet? Have we adopted Agile? Are we Agile organizations? And for the most part, the answer is no. Unfortunately, we're getting there, but it takes time. And what's interesting is for all the marketing and for all the rhetoric, we're not seeing as much benefit from adopting these frameworks like Scrum and SAFe and LeSS and many others as we're being told. Now, there's wonderful anecdotes, and some organizations are doing phenomenally well, or at least some teams are. But for the most part, on average, it's not working out as well as we'd like. And there's a few reasons why, which I'll talk about. But I think a lot of it is, what Anand was talking about earlier, was that there's too much focus on the process, and there's too much focus on, particularly on ceremonies, like running meetings and stuff like that, as opposed to doing the real work. So I think there's that as an issue, as well as bringing Agile out across the organization. We're hearing clearly that from some of the questions and survey results that this isn't happening as fast and as well as it should. So keep that in mind as I overview what DA is all about. So anyway, so what is DA? What is Discipline Agile? Discipline Agile is a toolkit. It's not a framework. So where the frameworks like SAFe and Scrum, which are wonderful, they clearly bring some potential benefit. The frameworks tell you what to do. They narrow your options. They present ideas as best practices, and they tell you, here's what you need to do in order to succeed. And the problem with that is it doesn't respect the context that you face, because everybody is unique. Every team is unique. Every organization is unique. You face unique problems. The situation is constantly changing. So so what is a good practice or effective practice for you might be a phenomenally bad idea for somebody else, and vice versa, right? So different people in different situations will work in different ways. This is blindingly obvious. Yet the frameworks tell you, here, follow these best practices, follow these ceremonies, and everything will work out for you. And the answer is no. It simply is not working out as well as they're promising, and the numbers just don't show, don't match their claims. So how can we work better? So the scope of Discipline Agile has grown over the years. It started originally at IBM as Discipline Agile Delivery, one of these 24 hexes that you see here. These hexes are what we call process blades or process areas, and they're different aspects of an organization. So most organizations, particularly medium and larger sized ones, have these explicit job functions or process areas within them. Smaller ones and startups are still doing these things, but they're growing into them, and it might not be completely explicit yet. It's certainly implicit, but not explicit. So the idea is, how can we be effective and more importantly, learn how to improve in all aspects of our organization, and how does it all fit together, and how do we affect each other. So because Agile isn't just for software development. One of the challenges we heard from the survey was, how do we bring Agile out to the rest of the world? To the rest of finance. How do we bring it to finance? How do we bring it to the marketing people, to the governance effort, to the HR, the people management effort, the enterprise architects, and so on? How does this all fit together, and how do we improve and learn as an organization over time? And because that's what it's really all about. It's not about adopting a framework. It's not about adopting Agile. It's about becoming a learning organization. It's about getting better at getting better. And Anand was talking about these top 20 organizations and how much better they are than the rest of us. And they're not. There's nothing special about them. They're not naturally better. They didn't just luck out. They worked hard. They improved over time. So they might be 100 times better than you are today. But 20 years ago, they probably were a little bit better than you, but they improved over time. They just kept getting better and better and better and better. And now they're significantly better than you and way ahead of you. So how do you catch up? So I'm going to show you how to catch up, or at least narrow the gap a bit. So the DA toolkit is this comprehensive agnostic toolkit. So where the Scrum the Scrum Guide, which is a wonderful piece of work, it's a 13-page body of knowledge. So there's a few details missing. The Choose Your WOW book, which is just focused on software development on team agility, is 400 pages. Because we address a few more issues. You get into some of the details that get glossed over by some of the frameworks. So there's nothing wrong with Scrum. It's great. I love it. But we need to recognize that it's limited, it's small, and it focuses on a few things and a few important things, but it purposely misses a lot of other things. So keep that in mind. We're about to hit a diagram that will make it blatantly obvious what I'm getting to. And here it is. So anyways, so here is actually, we didn't talk about this at all, but earlier Anand was talking about, one of the great issues that we need to address in the community is, how do we approach requirements? Well, this is one aspect of requirements. How do we explore scope? And this is something called a goal diagram. So it's a way that we summarize the choices that you have and the decisions that you need to make. So when we're exploring, or at least you need to consider. So when you're exploring scope, you have to address issues like, well, how are people going to use this system, this solution that we're producing? How are we going to explore the domain, like explore the data aspects of things? How are we going to explore the business process? How are we going to explore the user interface, the usability aspects? How are we going to explore quality requirements, like all the ILDs, that are absolutely critical to drive our testing strategy and drive our architecture decisions? How are we going to go about modeling and doing the exploration work, interacting with our stakeholders? How are we going to prioritize and manage these requirements? Like how do we go about these things, right? So there's a lot of issues around exploring scope, around exploring the requirements for what we're doing. And we make these explicit. And in DA, what we did, I'll go into more detail in a few slides, but we give you advice around what these techniques are all about and the trade-offs associated with them. So that way you can choose the techniques that make sense for you in the situation that you face. So instead of telling you, here's the one or two techniques that you explore requirements with, we instead say, well, these are the issues you need to think about. Here are some options for you to address these issues. You choose the right ones for you. So it's the equivalent of, so the frameworks are like telling you, oh, you want to have a meal today? You want to have lunch today? Well, here's the fast food special. Here's the McChicken burger and fries and a Coke. And that's what you're going to have because that's the best meal, because that's what we want to sell you. Whereas this is the equivalent of, here's a bunch of ingredients and let us help you make your own meal, so that way you can eat healthy and you can eat something that actually meets the needs of your family, as opposed to the McChicken deal. And by the way, you're going to have the McChicken meal for every meal for the rest of your life, because that's what we want to sell you. And maybe at some point we'll start selling you an egg McMuffin or something as well, just to mix things up a bit. So we can do better than that. We need to do better than that. So what's interesting is that, sort of put this in juxtaposition, The frameworks and the methods, what they do is they tell you best practices, what they believe to be best practices. So they limit your choices. They make the decisions for you. And that's easy, right? Some people just want to be told what to do. Well, eat the McChicken meal. Okay, fine. I'll have McChicken for lunch today and tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after that too, because hey, McChicken is awesome. But they've effectively redacted your choices, your software engineering choices, and your choices for doing your job. And so I would argue one of the reasons why we're sort of messed up now in the software world on requirements, because that certainly was not the case in the 90s. It might have been in the 80s, but there was a renaissance in the requirement space in the 90s, and then we killed it off with the Agile movement because everything was a user story or an epic, if you got to get really complicated. So we need to do better than this. So how? So another idea I want to point out, and I mentioned this earlier, is it's not, your job is not to adopt an Agile framework. That might be a good starting point. Don't get me wrong. It's great to adopt Scrum. It's great to adopt SAFe. There are benefits for doing so, but it's not your endpoint. So what you really want to do is think of your organizational transformation as a journey from point A to point B, or from journey of starting wherever you are today and becoming a learning organization like the Amazons and the eBays of the world, these organizations that are significantly more effective than you. And the reason why they're more effective than you is because they've been doing this process improvement stuff for several decades now, and they're just way ahead of you because they've been working on it while you've been fooling around and adopting frameworks. So align yourself, figure out where start where you are, then get on, start to learn how to improve, learn how to get better. And I'm going to walk through a few techniques really quickly to do that. And then what you really want to do is get to the point where you've become a learning organization. You've learned how to learn. You've learned how to improve. And this is much different than learning how to just follow a bunch of practices or a bunch of ceremonies. So just to review the idea again, so you assess, you start where you are, you get aligned, figure out what your starting point is. So think of it as, you're at one point in the city and you've got to get home, right? And there's many ways you can get from point A to point B. You can take a bus, you can drive a motorcycle, you can walk, you can take a subway perhaps if it's available to you. You can get a taxi. There's many different ways and many different routes to get to home, to get to this what you want, this learning organization. So if your strategy to become a learning organization, if you're brand new to Agile, there's different ways of doing that. But that'll be different than if you desperately need to change really quickly. Like there's ways you can shorten a transformation. It gets very expensive and very, very risky, but you can pull that off, as opposed to a safer, longer term greenfield adoption. If you're an existing SAFe shop, then your starting point is different. It's SAFe. And because we know what SAFe is all about, and we know what the challenges are with SAFe, and what the advantages and disadvantages are of SAFe, the adoption to move away from SAFe and to become a learning organization to improve upon SAFe is different than if you're new to Agile, right? Because once if you're truly doing SAFe or something close to SAFe, then chances are pretty good you're suffering from a certain collection of problems, a certain collection of challenges. And because we know that, well, if you've got this challenge, well, there's different ways to get out of that and improve away and solve that problem. Similarly with Scrum, Scrum has a common set of challenges. And, once you recognize, oh, it's a Scrum shop, well, okay, boom, 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 boom. Here's what your problems are going to be. And here's different ways you can move away from that. So let's get on the improvement path here. Or maybe you're just, maybe you're doing really well in the software area, but your marketing team is struggling with Agile, or your HR group is struggling with Agile, or your enterprise architects or your procurement people are struggling with Agile. So transforming those groups collections of those groups is a different animal than transforming the entire organization from scratch or from SAFe or from whatever. So different organizations are in different situations. So they will follow different paths to get to the real destination, which is to become a learning organization that knows how to get better at getting better. So the point I want to make is that It's not Discipline Agile versus SAFe or Discipline Agile versus Scrum or Spotify or whatever. It's SAFe plus Discipline Agile, or SAFe or Spotify plus Discipline Agile. So if you're doing any of these methods, well, that's your starting point. Great, good for you. How can we improve from there? How can we get better? Because that's what you really want to do. So how do we do that? Well, how did the Amazons of the world get as good as they are? How did they become 2 orders of magnitude better than some of the not so good organizations out there? Or if you're a mid-range organization, maybe they're only 1 order of magnitude better than you, right? Or 1.5 orders of magnitude better than you. But still, they're doing significantly better than you. How did they get there? Well, they did it one small step at a time. They didn't adopt these frameworks, or if they did, they looked at them and then they moved on, including Spotify, by the way. Earlier we were talking about Spotify. Well, if you actually read about Spotify, the very first thing they tell you is don't adopt this method. That's the very first thing out of their mouths. Because what Spotify did was they learned how to learn. They followed a process like this where they made a bunch of small improvements over time, and that's how they did. So, and they've moved beyond what people consider the Spotify method, by the way. That was like almost 10 years ago now for them. They've moved way beyond that. They're not doing that anymore. So, because what they are doing, they're doing this. They're improving over time. So the question, though, becomes, how do you get better at this? Because where are the challenges with this approach? So where are the challenges with this small, incremental improvements over time? And this, by the way, is a basic lean technique from total quality management like 30, 40 years ago. So this is this Kaizen approach to continuous improvement is a well-proven technique that's been around for decades. So where are the problems? Well, the problem is in this third step. So when we try out a new technique or a new potential way of working, we need to experiment with it. We need to give it a try and see what happens. Does this technique work for us is the question we're trying to answer. And the challenge is that some of these experiments fail. And there's a lot of really good rhetoric around this. Well, it's not really a failure because you're learning what doesn't work. If you're smart, you fail fast as opposed to fail slowly. All this wonderful rhetoric. But the fact is you're still failing. And if you're the person paying the bill, it's not that attractive hearing all this fail fast nonsense, right? Can you fail less often? Can you be smarter about the experiments that you're running? So yes, failing fast is significantly better than failing slowly. So, that's a win. Can we succeed earlier is a valid question. Can we be smarter about the way we do this? And the answer is yes. With a little bit of humility, if you recognize that you're not a leading edge organization, more than likely you're not a leading edge organization like these other companies, and that in fact you are dealing with problems that have been solved by many people before you, or at least similar problems that have already been solved, you could probably learn from their learnings. You do not have to reinvent the wheel unless you truly are on the bleeding edge. So the observation I want to make is that if we can get better at identifying the potential techniques to experiment with, then what will happen if we make better decisions, then we will have fewer failed experiments. Because when we make a better decision, we'll more than if we can get good at identifying something that's probably going to work for our situation, then we'll have fewer failures. Nobody's perfect. You're still going to have some failures, but you're going to have a lot less. So your process improvement will be cheaper and it'll be faster, just by being a little bit smarter about the way that you choose to experiment with things. So how do you do that? Well, if you have access to great coaches who have been there, done that, and can give you advice, and you're willing to follow their advice, that's the problem with coaching, then yes, that's great. But can you find these people? Can you afford them? Can you keep them? Easier said than done. A lot of people claim to be coaches. Not as many people are as good at being coaches as the people who are claiming to be good coaches. So you got to be careful with that. And I'm a firm believer in coaching. Don't get me wrong. Firm believer in coaching. Or if you have access to a process toolkit like DA that can help you identify techniques that are more than likely going to work for you in your situation, you'll make better decisions. So this is what DA is all about. We can teach you how to do this. So how does that work? So this is a technique that we call guided continuous improvement, because by being willing to follow a little bit of advice, by learning how to use the toolkit, you can make better decisions and thereby improve faster. So how does it work? So we saw this diagram earlier, this goal diagram of exploring scope. Well, if you're a requirements expert, then this is this is basically a checklist for you. And because I can look at this and go, oh yeah, we've got a problem here. And more like the UML state chart is what we want to do. And okay, here's how we do it. Because I've done these things. I know all this stuff. But say you're not a requirements expert. So, say nobody on your team has this background. Well, you've got a problem, right? So what do? Well, we realize, if we have a certain problem, we realize, you know what? We're having a problem exploring how people are going to use this system. And, we're using we're using user stories and epics, but we're just not getting the job done. Well, look at this. There's actually more options than just epics and user stories. Well, okay, fine. Let's go and do a little bit of reading. Now, if, like I said, if we were experts, then the diagram was more than enough. But if we're not, then we can dive down to the next level of detail. This is why it's a 400-page book, or I don't know how many bytes it is on the digital version online, but it's a 400-page book. So we go into the book and we do a little bit of reading. So we say, oh, look, here's all these different techniques, and here's these trade-offs. So I can't tell you what the best practices are because I don't know about your situation, but you know about your situation. You know who's on your team. You know what you're trying to do. You know what your strengths and weaknesses are. You know what your skills are. You just might not know about the techniques because you're not process experts, and that's okay, right? So as long as you know how to traverse the toolkit, you can very quickly, home in on techniques that more than likely will work for you. And in this case, whatever this person's whatever this team's issues were, they talked it out, and there was, what, maybe experimenting with personas is the way to go here. Let's try that. Okay, so we can narrow down our options to something that's more than likely going to work for us. So let's experiment with that technique. Try it out for a sprint or two, see what happens. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, then we'll try something else. So we can have more intelligent experiments and have fewer failures. So this level of skill, so at the individual and team level, this techniques works very well. And this is what we teach in our Discipline Agile Scrum Master and Discipline Agile Senior Scrum Master certifications, if you're interested in learning about these techniques. In the toolkit itself, if you remember what those 24 hexes I very briefly overviewed, one of them was this is at the team level. I'm sorry. At the team level, we talk about not only do we tell you how to traverse these goal diagrams in order to learn various techniques, we also eat our own cooking. So we describe how do you evolve your way of working in terms of, well, here's a bunch of options for doing exactly that. And then, just like we saw for Explore Scope, that we had options and details and behind it, same thing for evolving your way of working. So it's the same sort of idea, because one strategy, one technique is not going to get the job done for process improvement either, right? Got to give you choices. Another challenge, and the survey sort of got at this, was this survey we heard about earlier sort of got at this, is one of the challenges that we see in our organizations is our agile team, like our delivery teams, our software teams might be very good at being agile because there's all this literature and all this help for software development teams to become agile. But then what happens, we're not autonomous. One of the great myths of the agile community is that our teams are autonomous. This simply is not true. They're semi-autonomous. We have these 2 pizza teams and all this sort of stuff. But for example, my supposedly autonomous team still needs to get funding from the finance group, the people with the money. Right? They got to fund my project. So I got to interact with them somehow. But the problem is, well, what do you do when the finance team doesn't want to work in an agile manner because they're still doing annual budgeting, for example, right? Well, that really sort of hampers your ability to be agile. Or what happens if the HR people aren't working in an agile manner? I need to add somebody to my team really quickly. Well, it's going to take several weeks. No, I need them now. Right? Stop fooling around. Get me somebody. Or what happens if my release management people, the people I got to work with to release something into production because we're not quite doing DevOps yet? What happens if they're not doing DevOps yet? I got a problem, right? So, but I still got to work with them. How do we work with them in an agile manner? How do I convince them to try a new technique in order to be more effective? Because now we have to experiment with a cross team. We got to learn how to experiment with a new technique that's going to affect two teams, and these two teams have very different priorities, very different groups of people, very different ways of looking at the universe. And in this case, my team is a lot more agile than this other team over here. So let's work through how do we solve that problem? That's a fair question. So let's work through this issue of, the finance team is misaligned with Agile, is the nice way to say that. Well, look at the goal diagram. So my finance team wants to work in a reasonably traditional manner. There's, they want me to put in a formal request for money. It's basically a fixed price approach. Those are reasonably effective ways of working. And if you look, these lists with arrows beside them are basically a maturity model. So when you see a list like this, with, in this case, all three of them are ordered, what that says is that the strategies towards the top of the list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. So my finance team, for whatever reason, is choosing to follow a reasonably ineffective way of funding Agile software development teams. And they truly believe in this. They're not doing it for the sheer joy of doing it. They believe in what they're asking for. They might not know there's better options. They might not understand the impact of what they're asking for. They probably don't realize that they're increasing the financial risk on my project in their efforts to minimize it. So we have to have an intelligent conversation. But if nobody on my team understands finance and can speak intelligently to finance, then we're never going to get out from under their thumb, right? So we need to coach between teams, right? And the coach has to understand, well, here's what this software team is trying to achieve. Here's what these finance people are trying to achieve. Let's work together to identify a better strategy that we can experiment with, and let's find out if it works for us in our situation, right? And let's do this in a fail-safe type of a manner. So this is what we teach in the Discipline Agile Coach certification. And then, of course, value streams, right? So a value stream, how do you bring products and services to the market? A value stream begins, ends, and hopefully continues with the customer in mind. So you go through this process and you want to streamline all this. All this has to work together effectively. The process blades in the middle here are all supporting activities, are all part of the overall value stream, but they're indirectly involved with the value stream, might be a way of saying it, or they support the value stream. So we need to optimize the entire value stream, not just locally optimize around software development, around portfolio management, around whatever. So in this case, maybe we've got a problem where our enterprise architects really aren't interacting well, or they're the current bottleneck in our value stream, and so we need to optimize that. So what do we do? Well, once again, right, we can go look at the goal diagrams. We, whatever that problem is that we're facing on the enterprise architecture side of things. Well, once again, we've got options. Maybe there's better ways of working that we can experiment with and understand. So this is something we teach in the DAVSC, the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant. How do we improve at the value stream and the organizational level at the bigger picture? So the point I want to make is that we can apply different categories of improvement at different levels of the organization using the toolkit to help various groups identify new ways and potentially better ways of working that they can experiment with and improve over time. And what happens is when you get into this mode where you're experimenting with a new technique, measuring it, adopting it if it works, abandoning it if it doesn't, this is how you improve over time. And then once you build that sort of a strategy into your DNA, this is when you become a learning organization. And this is what you really want. And this is what the Amazons of the world have done and the Googles of the world have done. All these hyper-competitive organizations, they do this continuous improvement approach. My suggestion is that you can be even smarter than that, because you can leverage the learnings of other smart people who've come before you and adopt mostly known techniques if you choose to. Discipline Agile, I guess I was trying to point out earlier, one of those hexes is also around continuous improvement. So once again, there's a very wide range of techniques, some of which are coming from Spotify, some of which are coming from elsewhere. But there's a range of techniques that you can choose from to do continuous improvement and sharing your learnings across the organization as well. So once again, we're eating our own cooking. So just to wrap up here before we get to questions, the question I want to ask you, I want to leave you with this rhetorical question: are you a follower or are you a leader? Right, because I'm, most of my presentation here today is to help you to become leaders in the Agile community and leaders in process improvement. So think about that. So why is this important? Why is guided continuous improvement and similar techniques that we have in the toolkit should be of interest to you? Well, we've seen there are benefits to adopting the frameworks like Scrum and SAFe and LESS and others. You definitely get a benefit, assuming you're successful with it, of course. But you do get a benefit, but you quickly peak out, because one of the challenges with the frameworks as well is they solve a certain problem, which is great. But once you solve the problem, they don't really have much more to offer you, because they've limited. And you remember that that redacted diagram. They've limited your choices, and they really don't tell you, other than hand waving and telling you to hire consultants. They don't really give you any advice for improving beyond what the framework tells you to do. So the firms that are really successful in the marketplace, like the Amazon and the Googles of the world, they take a continuous improvement approach. And this is why they're so far ahead of you now. With Discipline Agile, you can catch up. And or at least you can narrow the gap. You'll probably never catch up, but you can narrow the gap and improve faster and improve cheaper, because you can leverage the learnings of the people that have come before you. By being behind, there's some advantage there by being behind. So our advice is start where you are. You're pretty much guaranteed to have to do that. Do the best that you can in the situation you face. You're professionals. I know you're doing that already, but always strive to get better. Always be trying to experiment, always be willing to learn. And I would advise you to adopt the learnings of others if you choose to. And it's an easy thing to do. So we're all about helping you to work smarter and giving you the skills to work smarter and to become change makers within your organizations. To help you improve your careers and to frankly have more enjoyable jobs, because why wouldn't you want to enjoy what you're doing? So there's a lot of great opportunity here if you want to take the next step in becoming agile and becoming more agile and all these good sorts of things. So I would ask you to don't trust me at all. Do some learning. Go off and do a little bit of research. Learn more about Discipline Agile. We've got a lot of great resources on the web for free. If you happen to be a PMI member, the Choose Your Wow book is available to you as a PDF free of charge. If you're not a PMI member, then it's $20 US. So it's a fairly inexpensive book, particularly given that it's 400 pages of really solid material. So there's some great techniques there. So anyways, take time to give it a shot. So thank you very much. I might be running a bit late here, but hopefully I still have a bit of time for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Scott. And this was such a valuable, so many tips and techniques that we could actually take home and implement it in our own organization. I'm sure the audience was taking a lot of notes. I mean, I was wondering where was all of this when my organization was going through the journey, right? So thank you for all the tips, from starting from an individual all the way to teams and organizations, and helping us learn about the importance of the continuous improvement, and that being the key driving factor for agile adoption. So thanks for that. We do have a lot of questions, Scott, but owing to time, I'm going to one. One was, is this information freely available on internet, or the Disciplined Agile?
Yeah, as you can see there right there, pmi.org/disciplinagile. There's a lot of information available. Like I said, the book is available free of charge to PMI members. If you're not a member, then the book itself is $20. It's really cheap. It's as inexpensive as you're going to get, and that's for both paper and electronic copy.
Great, thank you.
And if there's other questions, like Anon.
Yeah, just one more, and I thought this was a very interesting question. When we have all of these tips and tools, etc., doesn't the Disciplined Agile kind of limit the power of Agile by giving a recipe for everything? I mean, we understand the concept of learning from what has already been done and not reinventing the wheel, but does it inhibit creativity and innovation?
No, I think it enables you to become more innovative. The reinventing the wheel, and that's fun. Without a doubt, it's fun to invent techniques. But for the most part, reinventing the wheel is a waste of time. You're much better to reuse. Start with a little bit of humility, and choose to reuse the learnings of others and leverage those, and then truly work on leading edge stuff. Right, like why would you want to spend the next couple of years reinventing test driven development, for example? Like, what's the attraction of that? That's crazy. So I would just invite you not to and think of it this way. Like, if you think DA is limiting your innovation, well, holy crow! I'm not going to go back to that slide. But if you remember that slide where I blacked out 95% of your choices, how the heck is that innovative? When they're not even telling you what to do. So and Geetha, well, your question was, well, where was this when my organization was doing it? It was probably out there. It's been out there since the late 2000s, but you didn't know to look for it because you didn't even think to go looking for it, and your coaches didn't know any better either, right? And or maybe they were motivated not to tell you about it because it sort of destroys their business model. So it's harsh, but it's like you didn't know. I'm sorry, you didn't know to go look. So you could have leveraged that, but you didn't, right? And this is the challenge with techniques like mob programming. If you've never heard of mobbing, like, there's a wonderful technique that may or may not be valuable to you, but you'd never know. Or the SRE techniques. If you don't even know to go look for them, or you don't know the language or the search terms to use, at best you're going to stumble into those. And some of those techniques on your own, you're not going to invent those on your own. You might stumble into one or two of them. You're not going to stumble into all of them, because the Googles of the world have far more resources than you do. So so this is the thing. So I just go take a look what's there. Like, it's interesting. Some of the comments, some of the feedback we always get from like experienced Scrum Masters and experienced coaches is along the lines of, wow, like like, I've literally taught workshops where on the first day, the experienced Scrum Masters were just attitude cases, going, I know everything there is to know. And by the end of the first day, the only response I've ever gotten is, oh my God, there's so much stuff here. It solves numerous. Not only do you solve the problems we've been struggling with for a long time, you've got multiple options to solve the problem. It's amazing. And there's all these other issues we haven't even stumbled into yet. We were years away from realizing we had these issues. So that is the power of it.
Yeah. Yep, I agree with you, Scott. And I encourage all the audience to explore the toolkit and then decide, like, what's relevant and not relevant. Yeah. Sorry, in the interest of time, though we have a lot of questions, we'll share that with you, Scott. We're going to move on to the panel discussion now.